the 40th floor. A maintenance worker in an oil-stained uniform standing before the most powerful woman in the city. Sloane Whitfield hadn't called anyone to her office in 3 years, not like this. Not with that look in her eyes. "Why does your daughter call me Mommy?" The question hit like ice. The whole building had heard it by now, a 5-year-old girl shouting, "Mommy!" across a crowded elevator reaching for a CEO who hadn't smiled in 3 years. Cole Harrison didn't blink. He looked at the woman trembling behind her glass desk and said the only truth he knew. Because she doesn't know what a mother looks like. She only knows what a mother feels like. Sloane Whitfield, the ice queen of a $2 billion empire, couldn't speak. And what came next would break them both open. Cole Harrison had worked the night shift at Whitfield Tower for almost 2 years, now pushing his cart through marble hallways long after the last executive had gone home. The job paid $12 an hour, which wasn't much, but it came with something money couldn't buy: flexibility. His supervisor, a tired man named Doug, who'd seen too much to ask questions, let Cole clock in at 6 in the evening and clock out at 2 in the morning. That schedule meant Cole could pick up Rosie from kindergarten at 3, spend the afternoon with her, feed her dinner, and get her settled before his shift began. It wasn't perfect. Nothing had been perfect since Meredith died, but it was enough to keep them afloat, and some days that was all Cole could ask for. The problem was the gaps. Rosie's babysitter, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Finley, who lived 2 doors down, had been reliable for 18 months straight. Then her sister in Florida got sick, and suddenly Cole found himself staring at a calendar full of holes. He tried everything: other neighbors, the church daycare, even a teenager down the block who claimed she was great with kids. None of it worked. The neighbors had their own lives. The church daycare closed at 5. The teenager spent more time on her phone than watching Rosie. So on the nights when there was no one else, Cole did the only thing he could. He brought his daughter to work. The basement of Whitfield Tower had a storage room next to the mechanical systems, a cramped space filled with old office furniture and forgotten files. Cole had dragged a small couch in there months ago, the kind with faded cushions and a slight smell of dust. Rosie called it her secret fort. She would curl up with her stuffed bear, a ratty thing named Mr. Buttons that had been through the wash so many times his fur was matted flat, and she would draw pictures until sleep took her. Cole checked on her every 30 minutes, his heart in his throat, each time he pushed open that door. The guilt never left him. A 5-year-old shouldn't spend her nights in a basement. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was no job, no apartment, no food on the table. Rosie never complained. That was the thing that broke him most. She treated those nights like adventures, whispering to Mr. Buttons about the castle they were exploring, asking Cole if there were dragons in the boiler room. She had her mother's imagination, that wild ability to turn something ugly into something beautiful. And she had her mother's eyes, too wide and brown, and filled with a light that shouldn't exist in a child who had lost so much. Cole would look at her sometimes, asleep on that old couch, with her pink shoes still on, because she refused to take them off, and he would feel something crack inside his chest. Those shoes. Meredith had bought them 2 weeks before the accident. They were too small now, pinching Rosie's toes, but she wouldn't let him replace them. "Mommy picked these," she'd say, as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. The questions had started about a year after Meredith's death. Rosie was 3, then just old enough to notice the other kids at daycare had someone called Mommy, who picked them up, braided their hair, kissed their scraped knees. "Daddy," she'd asked one night, her small hand tugging at his sleeve, "what does a mommy do?" Cole had frozen. How do you explain a mother to a child who would never remember hers? He couldn't show her pictures. Rosie didn't recognize the woman in the photographs, couldn't connect that frozen smile to anything real. So instead, he told her what a mother did. He told her a mother was the person who knelt down when you fell, who tied your shoes and checked them twice, because once was never enough. A mother was the person who looked at you like you were the most important thing in the world, who smiled just from seeing your face. A mother was warmth and safety, and the feeling that you mattered. Rosie had listened carefully, nodded slowly, and from that day on, she searched for her mother everywhere. The first time Sloane Whitfield saw the girl, it was 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. She had stayed late to review contracts, the same way she stayed late every night, because going home meant sitting in an empty penthouse with nothing but silence and memories. The elevator doors opened to the parking garage, and there, sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor, with crayons scattered around her, was a child. Sloane's breath caught. The girl couldn't have been more than 5, with messy brown hair pulled back in a lopsided ponytail and a pair of pink shoes that looked too small for her feet. She was humming something tuneless, completely absorbed in her drawing, and she didn't look up until Sloane's heels clicked against the floor. "Hello," the girl said brightly, as if finding a stranger in a parking garage at 11 at night was perfectly normal. Her eyes were wide and curious, completely without fear. Sloane didn't answer. She couldn't. Her gaze had locked onto those pink shoes, scuffed at the toes, the Velcro straps fraying the exact shade of bubblegum that Wren used to love. For 3 seconds that stretched into eternity, Sloane couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at those shoes and feel something crack open inside her chest. Then she turned and walked away, her heels echoing too loud in the empty garage, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip her keys. She told herself she wouldn't go back. She told herself it was nothing, just a child, just a coincidence, just a pair of shoes that happened to look like a ghost. But the next night, Sloane found herself leaving her office at 11 again. And the night after that, the girl wasn't always there. Sometimes the basement hallway was empty, and Sloane would feel something that might have been disappointment if she allowed herself to name it. But when the girl was there, Sloane would slow her steps, would let her eyes linger for just a moment on that small figure, with the crayons and the stuffed bear and the pink shoes. She never spoke. She never got close. She just watched from a distance, the way you might watch a fire when you know the warmth could burn you. The girl noticed her on the 4th night. "Hello, elevator lady," she called out, waving with a crayon still clutched in her fist. Sloane nodded stiffly and kept walking. But something shifted inside her. Some wall developed a crack she couldn't seal. The 5th night the girl was crying, small hiccuping sobs that echoed off the concrete walls. She was sitting in a corner, her knees pulled to her chest, her face buried in the ratty fur of her stuffed bear. The lights had flickered, some electrical glitch that lasted maybe 10 seconds. But in the basement, 10 seconds of darkness was an eternity. Sloane stood 20 feet away, her hand pressed against the cold wall, watching this child shake with fear. She didn't go to her. She couldn't. But she stood there until the crying stopped, until the girl lifted her head and saw her standing in the shadows. "Are you scared of the dark, too?" the girl asked, her voice still wobbly. Sloane's throat tightened. "Yes," she heard herself say. It was the first word she'd spoken to the child, and it wasn't a lie. She was terrified of the dark, not the absence of light, but the darkness that had lived inside her for 3 years, the shadows that crept in whenever she stopped moving long enough to feel. The 6th night changed everything. The girl was struggling with her shoelaces. The Velcro straps on her pink shoes had finally given out, and her small fingers couldn't manage the knot Cole had tied that morning. She tugged and pulled, her face scrunched in frustration, and then she tripped. It wasn't a bad fall. Her knees hit the concrete, her palms scraped against the rough surface. But the sound she made, that small cry of surprise and pain, cut through Sloane like a knife. Before she knew what she was doing, Sloane was moving. Her heels clicked against the floor, her designer suit rustled as she knelt down, and her hands, the hands that signed billion-dollar contracts, that built an empire from nothing, gently took hold of the girl's shoe. "Let me," Sloane said quietly. She tied the laces slowly, methodically, the way she used to do for Ren every morning before school. When she finished, she tugged on the laces to test them, then tugged again. Once was never enough. That's what Ren used to say, giggling as Sloane double-checked her knots. Sloane's fingers trembled as she lowered the girl's foot back to the ground. "Are you a mommy?" the girl asked. The question hit Sloane like a physical blow. She looked up into those wide brown eyes, so full of innocent curiosity, and for one terrible moment, she couldn't remember how to breathe. She stood abruptly, her knees protesting, her heart slamming against her ribs. She didn't answer. She couldn't answer. She turned and walked away faster than before, almost running, her heels striking the concrete like gunshots. Behind her, she heard the girl's voice call out something, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The next week it happened in the elevator. Sloane had just finished a board meeting, her mind full of numbers and projections, when the doors opened on the lobby level and a maintenance worker stepped in with his daughter. The girl's eyes went wide. She pointed directly at Sloane, her small finger aimed like an arrow, and shouted at the top of her lungs, "Mommy!" The elevator went silent. 3 executives, 2 assistants, and a security guard all turned to stare. Sloane felt the blood drain from her face. The maintenance worker, a tall man with tired eyes and oil stains on his uniform, looked mortified. He grabbed his daughter's hand and whispered something urgent, but the girl wasn't listening. She was straining toward Sloane, her face lit up with joy, as if she'd just found something precious she thought she'd lost forever. "Mommy, you came back." The doors opened. Sloane fled. She didn't remember pressing the button, didn't remember pushing past the staring faces, didn't remember anything until she was in her office, with the door locked. Her back pressed against the wall, her chest heaving. The word echoed in her head like a scream. "Mommy. Mommy. Mommy." Nobody had called her that in 3 years. Nobody would ever call her that again, because Ren was gone, buried in a cemetery, across town, wearing her favorite pink shoes, because Sloane couldn't bear to see them empty. By noon the next day, the whispers had spread through every floor of Whitfield Tower. The CEO and the maintenance worker, the Ice Queen and the mystery child. Sloane heard fragments everywhere she went, hushed conversations that stopped when she approached, sideways glances from assistants who didn't think she noticed. She noticed everything. She always had. And she noticed the way people looked at her now, not with fear or respect, but with something worse: curiosity, pity, questions she couldn't answer because she didn't understand them herself. She called her head of HR that afternoon. Find out who the maintenance worker is, the one with the daughter. Her voice was ice, the same voice she used for hostile negotiations and boardroom takeovers. His name, his file, everything. The file arrived within the hour. Cole Harrison, 38 years old, widowed, 1 daughter, age 5. Night shift maintenance, exemplary performance reviews, no complaints. Sloane stared at the photograph clipped to the file, a man with a strong jaw and tired eyes, the kind of eyes that had seen too much and kept going anyway. She recognized something in those eyes. She'd seen it in her own mirror every morning for 3 years. "Bring him to my office," she told her assistant. "Now." Cole had never been above the 20th floor. The elevator climbed in silence, each number ticking by like a countdown to execution. His hands were clean. Now he'd scrubbed them 3 times in the basement bathroom, but he could still feel the phantom grease under his nails, the invisible evidence of who he was and where he belonged. The doors opened to a reception area that cost more than his annual salary. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers. A view of the city that made everything below look small and insignificant. The assistant who escorted him didn't make eye contact. She just pointed to a door at the end of the hallway and walked away. Sloane Whitfield stood behind her desk like a general preparing for war. She was tall, taller than he expected, with sharp cheekbones and blonde hair pulled back in a severe twist. Her suit probably cost more than his car. Her eyes were the gray of winter storms, cold and distant and impossible to read. Cole had seen those eyes on the company portraits that hung in the lobby, but in person they were different. In person, there was something behind the ice, something that flickered like a wounded animal trying not to show weakness. "Mr. Harrison." Her voice was clipped professional. "Do you know why you're here?" Cole swallowed. "I have an idea, ma'am." "Your daughter." She said the word like it burned her tongue. "She's been coming to work with you, against policy, against every regulation this building has." "Yes, ma'am, I know. I'm sorry. I'm not interested in apologies." She cut him off with a wave of her hand. "I'm interested in explanations. Why does your daughter call me Mommy?" There it was, the question he'd been dreading since the elevator, since the whispers started, since Rosie first pointed at this woman with joy in her eyes. Cole took a breath. He could lie. He could say Rosie was confused that she called everyone Mommy, that it meant nothing. But he looked at Sloane Whitfield, standing there in her armor of silk and power, and he saw the tremble in her hands, the tension in her jaw, the way her eyes kept flicking to something on the shelf behind her, a glass case, something pink inside. "You think I put her up to it?" Cole said quietly. It wasn't a question. The thought crossed my mind. Her voice was sharp but brittle. A single father working night shifts, barely making ends meet. And suddenly his daughter is calling the CEO of a $2 billion company Mommy in front of witnesses. It's quite a coincidence. Cole felt something rise in his chest, not anger exactly, but something close. Protectiveness. Pride. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I didn't even know who you were until last week. Rosie calls you Mommy because she thinks you are one. That's the only explanation I have." "That's ridiculous. I've barely spoken 2 words to the child." "I know. That's what makes it complicated." Cole looked at the glass case again, at the tiny pink shoes inside, and felt a cold understanding settle in his stomach. "Do you know how my daughter defines Mommy, Ms. Whitfield?" Sloane's expression flickered. "What? Her mother died 3 years ago. Car accident. Rosie was 2. She doesn't remember her. No memories. No face. Nothing. So I couldn't explain what a mommy looked like. I had to explain what a mommy does." Cole's voice was steady now, the voice he used when reading bedtime stories, when explaining difficult truths. "I told her, a mommy is someone who kneels down when you fall. Someone who ties your shoes and checks twice because once isn't enough. Someone who looks at you like you're the most important thing in the room. Someone who smiles when they see you, even when everything else is falling apart." Sloane's face had gone pale. Her hand gripped the edge of her desk. "Rosie has been looking for a mommy ever since. She called her preschool teacher that once, called our neighbor Mrs. Finley that twice. They all corrected her, told her no, that's not your mommy, and she accepted it." Cole met Sloane's eyes, gray storm meeting brown earth. "But with you, she won't accept it. With you, she's certain. And I didn't understand why until I watched you that night in the garage." "What night?" Sloane's voice was barely a whisper. "The night she fell. The night you tied her shoes." Cole took a step forward, then stopped himself. "You knelt down to her level. You tied the laces slowly, carefully. Then you tugged on them. Twice. And when you looked at her," his voice cracked just slightly. "When you looked at her, your face changed, just for a second. You smiled. I don't think you even knew you did it. But Rosie saw it, and that was enough." Sloane's hand moved to her throat, pressed against her pulse point. "I didn't smile. I don't smile." "You did." Cole's voice was gentle now. "You haven't smiled in 3 years. Everyone in this building knows it. They call you the Ice Queen when they think you can't hear. But you smiled at my daughter, and she felt it. She felt everything you tried to hide." The room was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of the city below. Sloane stood frozen behind her desk, her face a mask of control that was slowly cracking at the edges. Cole could see it happening, the tremor in her lip, the brightness gathering in her eyes, the way her shoulders had begun to curve inward, as if protecting something fragile. "Those shoes," Sloane said suddenly, her voice strange and hollow. "The pink ones she wears. Where did you get them?" The question surprised him. "My wife bought them, before she died. Rosie won't take them off even though they're too small now. She says they're magic because Mommy picked them." Sloane made a small wounded noise that seemed to escape against her will. She turned away from him, walked to the shelf where the glass case sat, and stood there with her back to the room. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "My daughter had shoes like that. Same color, same style. She was wearing them when she died." The words hung in the air like smoke. Cole felt the floor shift beneath his feet. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." "Don't." Sloane's voice cracked. "Don't apologize. You didn't know. You couldn't have known." She pressed her fingers against the glass case against the tiny pink shoes preserved inside like relics from another life. Wren. That was her name. She was 5 years old. She loved elevators, loved waving at strangers, loved. Her voice broke completely. "She loved it when I tied her shoes. Said once wasn't enough. Made me do it twice, every single time." Cole closed his eyes. The coincidence was too precise, too painful, too impossible to be random. 2 fathers, 2 daughters, 2 pairs of pink shoes. And somehow, in the basement of a building that touched the sky, those broken pieces had found each other. "I want to see the drawing," Sloane said suddenly. "The one she did at school. The one the teacher sent to HR." Cole nodded. "I can bring it. But Ms. Whitfield, just bring it." She still hadn't turned around. Her hand was still pressed against the glass. "Please." The drawing was done in crayon, the colors bold and slightly smudged, where Rosie's small hands had pressed too hard. It showed 3 figures, a tall stick figure with brown hair, labeled Daddy, a smaller figure with a triangular dress labeled Me, and a 3rd figure standing inside a rectangle. The rectangle had buttons on the side and a line down the middle, an elevator. The figure inside had yellow hair and a red mouth, a smile. Beneath it, in wobbly kindergarten letters, was one word: Mommy. Sloane held the drawing like it was made of glass. Her fingers trembled at the edges, careful not to smudge the crayon lines. She stared at that smiling figure, at the yellow hair and the red mouth, and something in her face collapsed. Not dramatically, not with tears or sobs, but quietly, a slow crumbling of walls that had stood for 3 years. "She drew me smiling," Sloane whispered. "She draws what she sees," Cole said gently. "What she feels." "I haven't smiled in 3 years. Not once. Not for anyone." Sloane looked up, and for the first time her eyes were wet. Not crying, not yet, but bright with something that wanted to be tears. "How did she see it?" "Because you did smile. Maybe you didn't mean to. Maybe you didn't even know. But you did. And Rosie felt it." Cole took a breath. "Kids don't understand masks the way we do. They don't see the walls we build. They just see the cracks in them." Sloane set the drawing down on her desk with exaggerated care, as if afraid she might damage it. Her hands were shaking visibly now, no longer hidden, no longer controlled. She walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the cold glass, looking out at the city that sprawled beneath her like a kingdom she no longer wanted. "Why does your daughter call me Mommy?" The question came again, but different now. Softer. Broken. Cole stepped closer, stopped at a respectful distance, and gave her the answer he'd been holding since the moment he walked into this office. "Because she doesn't know what a mother looks like. Her mother died when she was 2. She has no memory, no image, nothing. So I told her what a mother does. A mother kneels down when you fall. A mother ties your shoes and checks twice. A mother looks at you like you're the only person in the room. A mother smiles when she sees you, even when she's tired, even when the world is falling apart. Cole's voice grew quieter, more certain. And somehow, in an elevator at 11 at night, in a building where nobody even knows her name, you did all of those things. You are the first person outside of me who made my daughter feel like she mattered. He watched Sloane's shoulders begin to shake, watched the way she pressed her hand against the window, against the cold glass that separated her from the world. So when she calls you mommy, she's not confused. She's not manipulated. She's not mistaken. He let the words settle like stones in still water. She's just calling you what you are. To her, you're the definition of that word. Sloane turned around. Tears were streaming down her face, now cutting silent tracks through her perfect makeup, dripping onto the collar of her $2,000 blouse. She didn't wipe them away. She didn't hide. For the first time in 3 years, she let herself be seen. I stopped being a mother the day Ren died, she said, her voice wrecked. I stopped being anything. I just became this. She gestured at her office, at the empire of glass and steel that surrounded her. I thought if I built enough, worked enough, controlled enough, I could fill the hole. But it never filled. It just got darker. She walked to the shelf and lifted the glass case. Her hands trembled as she opened it the first time in 3 years. Inside, the tiny pink shoes were perfect, preserved, untouched by time. She held one in her palm like a wounded bird. She was wearing these when the car hit. I was supposed to pick her up from school, but I had a meeting. I sent the nanny instead. The truck ran a red light and her voice shattered. They let me keep the shoes. I don't know why. Maybe they thought it would help. It didn't. Cole said nothing. There was nothing to say. He simply stood, witness to a grief that had been locked away for 3 years, finally finding its way to air. Your daughter. Sloane continued, her voice raw. She looked at me like I was someone worth seeing. Like I wasn't just the ice queen, just the CEO, just the woman who signs the checks. She looked at me like I was... She couldn't finish. Like you were her mother, Cole said softly. Sloane nodded, the tears still falling. I haven't been looked at like that since Ren. I didn't know I remembered what it felt like. But your daughter. She held the small pink shoe against her chest, against her heart. She saw something in me I thought was dead. She saw it, and she called it by name. The office was silent for a long moment. Outside, the city hummed with indifference, millions of lives moving through their routines, unaware that 40 floors up, 2 broken people were finally breathing. I don't want to replace Ren, Cole said carefully, and I don't want you to replace Meredith. That's not what this is. Then what is it? He looked at the drawing on the desk, at the smiling figure in the elevator. I don't know. But my daughter hasn't been this happy since her mother died. And I think maybe, he chose his next words with care, I think maybe there's a reason she found you. I don't know if I believe in fate or God or any of that, but I believe in her, and she believes in you. Sloane set the shoe back in the glass case, but didn't close it. The lid stayed open, the shoes exposed to air for the first time in 3 years. A small thing. A beginning. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I don't know how to be around children anymore. I don't know how to be around anyone. Neither do I, Cole said honestly. I've been faking it for 3 years. Some nights I lock myself in the bathroom and cry so Rosie won't hear. Some mornings I can barely get out of bed, but I get up anyway because she needs me. He met her eyes. Maybe that's all any of us can do. Get up anyway. Sloane wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing mascara across her cheek. She looked younger, suddenly vulnerable, Nothing like the Ice Queen the whole building feared. "I'd like to see her again," she said quietly. Properly this time. Not in a parking garage at midnight. Not running away. She took a shaky breath. "I don't know what I can give her. I don't know what I can be. But I'd like to try, if you'll let me." Cole thought about Rosie, about the way her face lit up whenever she talked about the elevator lady, about the drawings she made almost every night now, a woman with yellow hair and a smile standing in a rectangle with buttons. He thought about what it might mean to give his daughter something he couldn't give her himself. Not a replacement mother. Something else. Something neither of them had words for yet. "She has soccer practice on Saturday mornings," he said. "The field behind the elementary school on 8th Street. Game starts at 10. Sloane's eyes widened. "You want me to come? I want you to decide if you want to come." Cole picked up the drawing from her desk, looked at it one more time, then set it back down. "This is yours. She'd want you to have it." He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Ms. Whitfield." "Sloane." Her voice was soft. "Just Sloane." He nodded. "Sloane. For what it's worth, I don't think it's an accident that she found you. And I don't think you smiled by accident either. Maybe some part of you has been waiting to be found." He left before she could respond. The elevator carried him back down to the basement, back to his cart and his tools, and his daughter, who was probably awake by now, wondering where he'd gone. But something had shifted. The weight on his shoulders felt different, not lighter exactly, but shared. For the first time in 3 years, Cole Harrison didn't feel completely alone. The soccer field was chaos. 25-year-olds in mismatched jerseys chased a ball across the grass, while parents lined the sidelines with coffee cups and folding chairs. Cole stood near the bleachers, watching Rosie run in circles that had nothing to do with the actual game. She was laughing her ponytail, bouncing her pink shoes, flashing against the green grass. She had let him replace the Velcro straps with proper laces last week. A small victory. At 10:15, a black car pulled into the parking lot. It was the kind of car that didn't belong here, all sleek lines and tinted windows worth more than most of the houses on the block. Cole watched as the door opened, and Sloane stepped out. She wasn't wearing a power suit today. Jeans, a simple white blouse, flat shoes. Her hair was down, falling past her shoulders in waves, instead of the severe twist she wore at work. She looked different, softer, terrified. She walked toward the field slowly, each step measured and uncertain. Cole raised a hand in greeting. She nodded, but didn't smile, not yet. She was too nervous to smile. He understood. This wasn't a boardroom. There were no contracts here, no negotiations, no rules she could control. This was something much harder. This was showing up. Rosie didn't see her at first. She was too busy chasing a butterfly that had wandered onto the field, completely ignoring the soccer ball that rolled past her feet. Then, one of the other parents cheered for something, and Rosie looked up toward the sidelines, and her entire face transformed. "You came back!" She sprinted across the field, ignoring her coach's confused shout, dodging between players like they were obstacles in a video game. She hit Sloane at full speed, wrapping her small arms around the woman's legs, pressing her face against the expensive fabric of her jeans. Sloane stood frozen. Her hands hovered in the air, uncertain, trembling. Cole watched from a distance, his heart in his throat. He saw the war on Sloane's face, the fear, the grief, the desperate hope. And then, slowly, her hands lowered. They settled on Rosie's back, gentle as falling leaves. "I came back," Sloane whispered. Rosie looked up, her brown eyes shining. "Are you going to watch me play?" "Yes." Sloane's voice cracked on the word. "I'm going to watch you play." Rosie grinned, the same grin her mother used to have, bright and wide and full of trust. And then she grabbed Sloane's hand and pulled her toward the field. "Come on, you gotta sit with Daddy. He brings the good juice boxes." Sloane let herself be pulled. She sat on the grass next to Cole, their shoulders almost touching, and watched a soccer game where most of the players didn't understand the rules and nobody kept score. Rosie waved at them constantly, forgetting the ball entirely whenever she wanted to make sure they were still watching. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say yet. But when Rosie scored her first goal, an accident. Really, she'd been trying to kick a dandelion. Cole and Sloane both jumped to their feet, both cheered, both clapped until their hands hurt. And when Rosie ran toward them with her arms raised in triumph, Sloane knelt down to meet her at eye level. "You did it," she said. Rosie threw her arms around Sloane's neck. Did you see? I saw everything." For a moment they stayed like that, a child who had found what she was looking for, and a woman who was beginning to remember what it felt like to be found. When Sloane stood up, her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. Actually smiling. The first real smile she'd allowed herself in 3 years. Cole pretended not to notice. He handed her a juice box instead. "Apple or grape?" She laughed. It was a rusty sound, unpracticed, surprised out of her by its own existence. "Apple. Thank you." They sat back down on the grass and watched the rest of the game in comfortable silence. And something that had been broken for a very long time began slowly to mend. 6 months later, the Saturday dinners had become tradition. Every week, Sloane drove her expensive car to Cole's small apartment on the 5th floor of a building with a broken elevator. She brought groceries because Cole wouldn't let her bring anything else, and she learned to make spaghetti because that was Rosie's favorite. The kitchen was too small for 3 people, but they made it work, bumping elbows and stepping on each other's feet and laughing at the chaos of it all. Rosie didn't call Sloane Mommy anymore. The word had evolved over weeks into Miss Sloane, then shortened to Slow, a nickname that made the CEO of a $2 billion company smile every single time she heard it. "Slow, watch this. Slow, try my drawing. Slow, can you do my hair like yours?" Small requests, ordinary moments, the building blocks of something that didn't have a name yet, but was real enough to hold. Tonight, Sloane was kneeling in the hallway, helping Rosie tie her shoes before bed. The pink ones had finally been retired, placed in a special box in Rosie's closet, alongside a photograph of Meredith. The new shoes were purple. Rosie's choice made after careful consideration and 2 hours at the store. Sloane tied the laces slowly, methodically, then tugged on them once. Then, twice. "Slow." Rosie's voice was sleepy but curious. "Why do you always tie them twice?" Sloane's hand stilled on the laces. She looked up at Rosie, at this child who had somehow reached through 3 years of ice and found the person buried underneath. Then she looked at Cole, who stood in the kitchen doorway watching. He nodded once, a small permission, a shared understanding. "Because once is never enough, sweetheart." Sloane's voice was soft but steady, a truth passed down through loss, through love, through the inexplicable ways broken people find each other. "Someone taught me that a long time ago, and now I'm teaching you." Rosie nodded seriously, as if this made perfect sense. Then she hugged Sloane goodnight, padded off to bed, with her purple shoes perfectly tied, and left 2 adults standing in a small apartment that felt bigger than any penthouse. Cole walked Sloane to the door at 9:30 the same way he did every Saturday. She would drive home in her expensive car back to her penthouse that wasn't quite as empty as it used to be. But tonight, she lingered at the threshold, her keys in her hand, her eyes on something he couldn't see. "She left this for you." Cole held up a piece of paper folded twice. "Said to give it when you were leaving." Sloane took the paper with careful hands. She unfolded it in the hallway light and went very still. It was a drawing. 3 figures holding hands, standing on green grass under a yellow sun. The tall figure on the left had brown hair. "Daddy." The small figure in the middle had a purple dress and purple shoes. "Me." The third figure on the right had yellow hair and was smiling, standing beside them, instead of trapped in an elevator. Beneath the figures in Rosie's improving handwriting were 3 words: not mommy, better. Sloane made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She pressed the drawing against her chest, against her heart, and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were bright, but clear. Better, she repeated softly. I think I like that. Cole smiled. She worked on it all week, made me promise not to peek. Sloane traced the crayon figures with her finger, the yellow hair, the smile, the hands linked together like a chain. What does it mean, better? Cole thought about it, about all the ways this word could be interpreted. A child's logic was simple and profound at the same time. I think it means you're not trying to be something you're not. You're not trying to replace anyone. You're just you. And to her, that's better than any label. Sloane folded the drawing carefully and slipped it into her purse next to her phone and her wallet and all the trappings of the empire she'd built. It would ride home with her tonight, and tomorrow she would frame it. It would hang in her office next to the glass case with Wren's shoes, 2 relics from 2 different lives, somehow coexisting on the same shelf. Same time next Saturday, she asked. Same time every Saturday. She nodded, stepped into the hallway, then turned back. Cole? Yeah. Thank you for letting me be part of this, whatever this is. He leaned against the doorframe, this man who had carried grief for 3 years without ever setting it down. Thank you for showing up. That's the hardest part, you know. The showing up. Sloane smiled, really smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and stayed there. I'm learning. She drove home through empty streets, the city quiet, in the way it only gets late at night. The drawing sat on the passenger seat, 3 crayon figures holding hands under a yellow sun. At a red light, Sloane looked at it again, at the word written in a child's careful letters. Better. Not a replacement. Not a copy. Something new. The light turned green. She drove on. And for the first time in 3 years, she didn't dread going home. The penthouse would still be empty when she arrived. The silence would still echo off the walls, and the memories would still wait for her in every corner. But something had changed. The darkness didn't feel quite so absolute. The silence didn't feel quite so final. Because somewhere across the city, in a small apartment with a broken elevator, there was a child who believed she was worth something, who looked at her and saw not an ice queen, not a CEO, not a woman frozen by grief, but someone worth drawing. Someone worth naming. Someone better. Sloane Whitfield smiled alone in her car at 11 o'clock at night, driving home through a city that never stopped moving. The tears on her face were old friends, now familiar and almost welcome. They meant she could still feel. They meant the ice was melting. And next Saturday she would show up again, because once was never enough.